So much, Elise. I'm excited to introduce tonight's new voices in YA. So first up, Faridah Àbíké-Íyímídé is a writer from South London who has dreamt of writing books about Black kids saving or destroying the world all her life. She is an avid tea drinker and a collector of strange mugs. Faridah currently studies English literature at a university in the Scottish Highlands. Ace of Spades is her New York Times bestselling debut novel, a contemporary YA thriller that has been described as Gossip Girl meets Get Out. Welcome, Faridah. Next up, Cory Anderson is a winner of the League of Utah Writers Young Adult Novel Award and grand prize in the Storymakers Conference First Chapter Contest. She lives in Utah with her family. What Beauty There is Cory Anderson's stunning debut novel about brutality and beauty and about broken people trying to survive. Thanks for being here tonight, Cory.
Hi, everyone.
Next up is Angeline Bully, author of the New York Times bestseller, Firekeeper's Daughter, her debut novel. Angeline Bully is an enrolled member of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians, is a storyteller who writes about her Ojibwe community in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. She is a former director of the Office of Indian Education at the U.S. Department of Education. Angeline lives in Southwest Michigan, but her home will always be on Sugar Island. Excited to chat with you tonight, Angeline.
Happy to be here.
Next up, Cassandra Hart grew up in upstate New York and Maine, where she spent most of her childhood among the seaside suburbs and rocky beaches that inspired the fictional town of West Finch. She went on to earn an English degree from Dartmouth College and currently works as a program manager for Google. She lives in the Bay Area and wishes she had a dog. Cassandra's debut novel, The Sea is Salt and So Am I, has been described as normal people meets I'll Give You the Sun. Welcome, Cassandra.
Hi.
And finally, last but not least, I'm excited to introduce Joan He, author of the New York Times bestseller, The Ones We're Meant to Find, her sophomore novel. Joan was born and raised in Philadelphia, but still will, on occasion, lose her way. At a young age, she received classical instruction in oil painting before discovering that stories were her favorite kind of art. She studied psychology and Chinese history at the University of Pennsylvania and currently writes from a desk overlooking the city waterfront. She is also the author of Descendant of the Crane, her young adult debut novel. So thank you everyone for being here. Hooray! So now let's get into talking about your titles. So who would like to start just giving a 1 to 2 minute description of your book? Angeline.
Firekeeper's Daughter, pitched as Indigenous Nancy Drew, when 18-year-old Donis witnesses a devastating murder. She has to use her science geekery and Ojibwe cultural knowledge to find out who's flooding her community with drugs and to protect her tribal community before she loses anybody else.
Thank you, Angeline. And Faridah, did you want to go next?
Sure. So Ace of Spades is best pitched as Get Out meets Gossip Girl, or like Pretty Little Liars meets Dear White People. And it follows Devon and Chiamaka in their final year at school when an anonymous texter starts to spread all of their secrets to the entire school, and they have to team up and take them down before things get deadly.
Thank you. And Cory, did you want to go next?
Sure. My debut is What Beauty There Is. It is a YA thriller, kind of a crime noir a la Fargo or Ozark, about Ava and Jack, two teens who get caught up in a drug deal gone wrong and a deadly game of betrayal.
Thank you. And Joan, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Joan. I'm the author of The Ones We're Meant to Find, which is about two sisters who are trying to find each other across the sea, with one of them being trapped on an abandoned island and no memories of how she got there, and the other sister living in this floating, technologically advanced city that protects its populace from a polluted, climate change wrecked outside world. It's kind of like Black Mirror meets We Were Liars with a little bit of Studio Ghibli.
Thanks, Joan. And last but certainly not least, Cassandra.
Yep, so my book, The Sea of Salt and So Am I, is YA contemporary, and it's about three teens living in a fictional town, small town in Maine, that is eroding into the ocean due to climate change. So it's told through three different points of view. One character is like this plucky go-getter, very determined to save her town. Her best friend is like a little less interested, but kind of along for the ride. And then her best friend's brother, Tommy, has depression and like not really interested in sort of anything at the moment. So the book sort of follows the three characters' journeys, how their relationships change over time, along with the town as they try to save it.
Thank you. So let's start with Faridah. How did you hone your ability to write just heart-pounding suspense? Do you have any specific inspirations or tips and tricks?
So I grew up watching shows like Pretty Little Liars, and I really loved how every episode kind of ended on a cliffhanger, and how it would make me and my friends at school want to like find out who like A is. And so I wanted to, I've always wanted to write something like that. So just being obsessed with those type of shows and books that were similar to those shows just made me kind of learn the formula, and inspired me to want to write something that would inspire people to want to find like who the Ace's character is in my book. And so yeah, that's how I've kind of done it.
Thanks. And then Cory, you grew up in Idaho where the book is based, and writing about rural America seems to be very important to you. Can you tell the group a little bit about why?
Sure, thank you. I grew up in St. Anthony, Idaho, which is this tiny, really rural community. If you think about like Tara Westover, educated, it's kind of that kind of isolated kind of community. And I think the population even today is about 3,000 people. And I just remember growing up that I often felt like that I didn't really have a story to tell, or that what I had to say wasn't very important. And I think some of that was because of where I came from and how I felt about it. So it took me a long time to learn that this wasn't the truth. So now when I'm writing, I feel like, hey, where I come from is pretty cool. And it's what formed me and made me who I am. And I want to be able to tell stories like that so that other young people who come from similar backgrounds and similar places can also feel like that they have a story to tell and that they have something important to say. I really feel like that that's something important for young people from rural communities to feel that they have a story too.
Thank you. So next up, we're going to ask a similar question as we're sort of traveling around the world in this discussion. Angeline, where did the spark for this story begin, and how did it grow over the years?
Well, I have told this story before. I was 18 and my best friend went to a different high school. She told me about a new guy. She thought I might like him. Turned out he didn't play sports and he hung out with the stoners, so that wasn't my type. And at the end of the school year, she said there was a huge drug bust, and it turned out that the new guy had been an undercover officer. And just the idea of what if we'd met, what if we'd liked each other, and then really the spark was, what if it wasn't that he liked me, but that he needed my help? And I just wondered, why would an undercover investigation, what circumstances would come about that an undercover investigation might need the help of a 18-year-old ordinary Ojibwe girl? And so, yeah, for about 28 years, I worked in different tribal communities, and I would find myself finding the puzzle pieces and how they would fit. So when I was 44, I started writing, but I was really creating the story and locking the puzzle pieces together the entire time before that. It was like, oh, what if it was a federal investigation? What if it involved her culture? What if she was strong in science and knew her language and culture? That might actually make her the ideal person to help with an undercover investigation. And so, yeah, it's been a long road, but very happy that it landed me here.
Thank you, Angeline. Cassandra, so how did you hone your ability to write stories from multiple perspectives? Do you have a certain process that works for you?
I'm like, how I honed it. It's very hard, is I guess like the first thing that I'll say. For me, sort of like a lot of nailing the characters' voices and figuring out how they're each unique involves like a lot of free writing at the beginning. And then sort of eventually I almost get to this place where I think of it as like having a touchstone for each character. So that might be a particular chapter near the beginning or a scene where like I know that sort of the way it's written, I'm like, oh yeah, this is how this character talks. They get the chance in this scene to like think about all the things that worry them and sort of like push their buttons. And it becomes this little piece where whenever I'm writing a different chapter from that character's point of view and I start to get lost, I'm like, oh wait, like, does it feel like it fits with that other chapter? Like, no, okay, then like, let's try to get back in that direction. And then I also, like, I guess down the line, I also tried to keep track of like each individual character, like what are their little tics, the kinds of things that one person would say, but the other person would say it very differently. And like actually writing that down on a page. But yeah, it's challenging. I think, and I guess I'll say the last step was like trying to read through each character's point of view chapters sort of all together. And again, finding the places where they weren't cohesive.
Thank you. And then Joan, both of your novels intricately explore love in all of its forms. How is this theme addressed via C and Casey's parallel journeys and the ones we're meant to find?
Yeah, so I think what fascinates me is when characters want the best for each other, but because of who they are and how different they are, they go about kind of achieving that same end goal in a very different manner, and that oftentimes causes them to harm each other or somehow impede each other on their routes to protecting each other. So that's kind of something that's explored in both my debut Descendant of the Crane and also in the ones we're meant to find, where C and Casey are very different people. They do want the best for each other, but because of just who they are and how they achieve their goals and how they kind of navigate and move through the world, kind of by trying to protect the other sister, they might end up causing a lot of pain.
Thank you. Well, now that you talked a little bit about your inspirations and your process, I wanted to ask the debuts. It's, the past 15 months have certainly been interesting and a unique time to be publishing your debut novels. How have you been able to connect with other writers and literary communities during the pandemic?
Well, for me, I left my position a month before COVID hit. And so I was a full-time author from that point on. And virtual, honestly, being on different panels with authors and, sometimes that was the only spoken conversation I would have all day was on a conference panel. And, you know, I think it took a little bit for all of us to get used to virtual events. And I still feel so badly for every debut author that had their debut spring of 2020 and summer of 2020, because they lost out. And that was when the entire publishing world was trying to figure out how to pivot to virtual. And I see the benefit now of virtual events really bringing our voices to people who never could have afforded to go to an in-person event. And I hope that that's something that publishing recognizes as so important, because that connection and being able to hear your favorite author talk, being able to get questions from the audience, you know, for all of us who've been in our homes for the most part, that was really, it's been a lifeline. It's been a major source of connection. And some days it was the only connection that I would have.
Yeah, I think it's a little hard to say, almost because as a debut, I feel like we don't, at least I don't know any different, right? Of like, I would have gone to in-person book events, right, for other authors. Like, so I almost like don't know what I don't know, or like what we've missed out on. I'm hopeful, right, that we'll have in-person events soon. But yeah, I agree with Angeline. Like, it has been nice to basically be able to tune into like everyone's virtual book launch that I've wanted to, or even, right, if they were like in a different time zone, then I'm like, oh, I can still watch the recording. But in other ways, I think like folks who, I guess writers who I like already knew a little bit, in some ways, I think we've actually gotten closer over the pandemic, because we are all, right, like in the same situation together. And I think especially last year, everyone was really craving connection. So like my writing group, we started doing some weekday write-ins, because I don't know if my work is on here, but like everyone's at home. And so just like take a little break in the morning, do an hour of writing, and hold each other accountable. So it was nice in that way, but I do hope we can meet each other in person at some point.
I just echo both everything that has been said. It has meant so much to me to find people this last year, other authors who I could talk to. I am pretty shy and introverted, so I'm not really great on things like Twitter. I feel a little bit vulnerable, and like, I don't know, it hasn't been the easiest thing for me to find my place in social media, but the relationships that I have found there in this last year, the friendships that I have found have meant so much to me. Like, I got to know Joan and Cassandra and others who it feels like they are true friendships, and that has really meant so much to me. The other thing that has meant so much has been like Instagram, when readers have reached out and found me and said, hey, I liked your book. That has been the greatest thing in the world, to talk to a reader who found What Beauty There Is and really liked it. So I would just like, I would encourage that. Like, if you find somebody that that is another author who you feel like you might like have something in common with, like for me, sometimes taking a little jump of courage to reach out to them is hard, but it has paid off in like tenfold and mattered so much to me. And then as the relationships with readers have happened, I think that's been my favorite thing over the last few months, to be able to find someone and say, oh my gosh, here's why, you know, I wrote the book, or here's why I mattered in the book, and to be able to have like those real conversations, you know, it has been the greatest thing in the world.
For me, like I'm in the UK right now, and I feel like a lot of events that I wouldn't have been able to go to, I've been able to attend and meet so many cool people in the industry. And so I feel like there's been a lot of positives in this very, like, you know, weird year where there's been a lot of sadness and some negative things, but I think just being able to like go to events that I never would have been able to go to before, or would have had to, you know, fly over, and I'm really scared of planes. So it's really been nice meeting people from across the world and meeting just so many nice readers and librarians and teachers and everyone.
And I'm not a debut, so I was lucky enough, I guess, to have a book come out before pandemic. But even then, I guess for me, I've never really done that many in-person things. And when I first started writing in high school, I really found my community via like the online writing community, like NaNoWriMo, Twitter, like all that happened online. So kind of to echo what Cory said, I feel like even during this time, it's still, I mean, that hasn't changed, right? The ability to connect with fellow writers and readers via social media is still something that's still present and constant even through this time of turbulence.
Thank you. That's so reassuring and nice that everyone has been able to find some pockets of community during this, you know, challenging time. Angeline, one thing that I know you took extra care with was making sure that you were thoughtful about what elements of Native culture you shared and when. Can you talk a little about how you used windows at some points and curtains and others?
Yes. There are certain things, certainly ceremony, that aren't meant for people outside of our community, and even within our community, people who don't practice those ceremonies. So I would make sure, for example, when Donis and her auntie does this intervention sweat, you know, the scene fades to black as they're entering the sweat lodge. And it picks up when they're sitting at the fire and they're eating soup and they're talking afterwards. And I always felt like I needed to be able to defend my decisions of what I would share and what I wouldn't share. I felt like I needed to be ready to defend it within my community. If anyone in my community was like, hey, you shouldn't have shared this, I needed to say, this is what I thought of. This was my process. These are my teachers. These are who I talked to about it, and I'm completely comfortable with where I drew the line. And someone else or some other tribes, they may draw that line completely differently. But for me, I was completely comfortable with where, you know, where I would do the fade to black. And I had this mantra while I was writing, and it was, I write to preserve my culture, and I edit to protect it. And that has served me well.
Thank you. Faridah, so Ace of Spades was inspired by your time at university. Can you tell the group a bit about your experience?
Yeah, so I grew up in South London, and my high school was mostly Black. It was like 90% Black, and then the next majority was Asian people, and then white people were the minority at my school. And so I never really had the experience of feeling kind of, I don't know, not represented in my area. I would go everywhere and I'll see people that look like me. And then I went to Scotland, and it was kind of the flipped situation. I would go days without seeing any person of color whatsoever. And for the first time, I was experiencing microaggressions. And it was very traumatic. And so I really wanted to unpack that, but in a way that was still entertaining and fun to me. I didn't want it to be a traumatizing read for any like Black teenager that would pick it up. And I really wanted to both just show kind of how systemic racism can come about, but also make it a fun read for people to just flip through like it's like an actual thriller, not like a history book. And so, yeah, that was kind of my inspiration.
Thank you. So Cassandra, you've addressed the topic in the media of writing unlikable characters. Why do you think it's important to create characters who are flawed and realistic at the cost of fitting a certain expectation or model?
So I think the easy answer is it's a lot of fun to write characters who make bad choices. The plot just sort of happens because they want a thing and then somehow they sort of mess it up for themselves and they're like, can't quite figure out why it went wrong. And they just keep trying, it just keeps getting worse. But I think like, apart from that piece, I personally don't love reading, or I guess, or writing books that like have, I don't know, are trying to be like overly inspirational or aspirational way. Like I enjoy reading to sort of like find community in a different way, like I guess of made up people and made up places. But so like I like to see sort of the full complexity, like the good and the bad of people on the page. And I guess the other thing is like, I think that already in real life, this like pressure to be likable is sort of ever present, and it's like everywhere, right? So like whether it's at work or at school, and again, it depends on like your background, but the expectations for each of us and like how we need to present ourselves in order to be like the most likable and the most palatable to different people. It's sort of like not a burden that I want to put on my characters. I like for them to be able to like be really messy and flawed sort of in this safe space of fiction, where they can mess up, and then for the most part, like things are going to like be okay, or the reader is going to be safe at the end, but can still experience that journey with them. But yeah, it's sort of funny like to talk about this because like I personally love my characters and I like unlikable characters. So sometimes I'm like, is that even a thing? But yeah.
Thank you. Joan, you grew up on dystopian novels, but wanted to place a fresh spin on some of those tropes with The Ones We're Meant to Find. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so I really got into reading because of a lot of the books that happened during the dystopian boom, such as like The Hunger Games, Divergent, Legend by Marie Lu. And one of the things I noticed, because I read so many of them, was that oftentimes you would have a main character who is very capable and able to do all these incredible things like topple a dictatorship or save the world or win the Hunger Games. And yet they're kept relatable and human oftentimes via a younger sibling relationship. So for example, in the case of the Hunger Games, you have Katniss, who is this really capable character. And yet when she's introduced to the reader, you kind of know she's human and vulnerable because she wants to do all of this to protect her sister Prim. And I thought that was really interesting that we kind of cue relatability and humanity that way. So I was thinking, okay, like what if I subvert that and I have an older sister who is looking for her younger sister, but that younger sister is so much more than just a storytelling device and this vehicle for relatability. And instead, the younger sibling is the one who is driving the plot, and maybe even like Cassandra mentioned, like kind of unlikable and unpalatable because they're a full person and they're not just a tool in the story.
Thank you. And Cory, Jack, Ava, and Maddie feel so real to the reader. Are they inspired by real people in your life?
Yes, they definitely are. I think that both Jack and Ava are so much me. And so they definitely come from different parts of me. Ava is probably most like I am. Her thoughts are mine, her struggles and her worries. So when I was writing Ava's point of view, I was definitely coming from a really vulnerable place where I was speaking kind of like it was me. She and I share the same black heart on our wrists for the same reason. And I was definitely that girl who thought that I had a black heart and that I'd lost the ability to love. So much of her narrative comes from my own life. And the reason that I wrote her, I think, was kind of for myself, so that I could make sense of her storyline as it related to my own, and love that storyline, and kind of write it in a way that made me feel that I could be proud of it. Jack's story is also so much me. I started writing What Beauty There Is when I had an eviction notice and an empty pantry, and in so many of the same ways that Jack is desperate, I was desperate. I remember I wrote the first chapter of the book when I was wondering how I was going to take care of my kids. And so Jack's relationship with Maddie is in so many ways a metaphor for my relationship with my own children, and the times when I wasn't sure what I needed to do in order to make sure that they were safe and well. So it means a lot to me to think that readers feel like that they are real, because they come from a really real place in my own life.
Thanks, Cory. Well, I know that these titles are all new, but now I have a question for all of you. What are you working on next?
I'm working on book 2, which is not a traditional sequel per se. And if book 1, if Firekeeper's Daughter is pitched as Indigenous Nancy Drew, then book 2 is Indigenous Lara Croft. But instead of raiding tombs, the main character is reclaiming ancestral remains and sacred items from museums and private collectors to bring back home. And in the course of one of her heists, things go very badly. It's still set in my same tribal community, and you'll see some familiar faces.
Candice, I am also writing book 2. I am writing about a 17-year-old girl who is living in the wilds of Wyoming, and the tragedy of murder that forces her out of isolation and the secrets of a small town. So my book is not in the world of What Beauty Is. It will be different, but I think I'll always write about the Rocky Mountains where I came from. It really matters to me, and I think that I'll always write about communities like that because it feels like where I came from.
I'm working on my book 2 as well. It's also not a sequel, but it's kind of like a boarding school thriller mystery, and it's more about feminism and friendship, and I pitch it as Mean Girls with Murder.
I've kind of genre hopped from Descendant into, which was a Chinese fantasy, into The Ones We're Meant to Find, which is the sci-fi. And I think my next book, I might actually be hopping back to Chinese fantasy. But with all my books, I hope like the one thing that stays constant is that there are really big twists in them.
I should be working on a second book. We're taking a little mini writing vacation. I moved to a new house and got married, and then my book came out like in 3 weeks. So I was like, I think that's like permission for a little break. But I am also like playing with a couple of different ideas. One set, I always think of like books in terms of like, yeah, where they're set. So one set in Vermont, one set in upstate New York, both places that I spent a lot of time. And so I don't know, I joke that like eventually I'll write enough books that I'll make my way across the country to California, where I live now, maybe.
Awesome, thank you. I feel like we all just doubled tripled the amount of 2 reads, even though I know that you all are still working on these titles or about to embark on working on another novel. So I'm going to hop a little early into the Q&A since Angeline has to hop off at 3:45. So let's see. One of the questions is for Angeline. I'm curious how your previous job played any role in writing The Firekeeper's Daughter.
My whole career has been working in tribal communities, working with teens, writing grants to address issues from within the community. And my last position was as director for the Office of Indian Education at U.S. Department of Ed. And I really felt like I was the right person at the right time for that, because there would be situations that would come up and I would say, that won't fly in a community that it's not even broadband. We have communities that don't have electricity. So I just, to me, the idea that as much as I could do working in federal government, that the message that I really wanted to share about seeing our tribal youth as individuals with complex histories and identities and connections to community, that I could accomplish more through a book than I could, working at the highest level in the US. So that's really what that's the beauty of a book. A book can do so much. It can put you in their eyes. It can put you in that world. It can have you, feeling things. And, as sexy as grants can be, grants just can't do that. So.
Thank you. And now here's a question actually for everyone. Could you please talk a little bit about the research that you had to do for your book?
So for me, I think I was kind of getting information as I was growing up about just the world and how society works and how institutionalized racism works as well. I was reading books like the autobiography of Malcolm X, and just like discovering new things. It took me a while to get out of what I call the sunken place. And then when I finally kind of started to understand about like racism and why I was experiencing certain things, I was able to write Ace of Spades. So it was really just reading a lot of books and studying like activists and their work.
And I'll just say, I wrote the book, I worked on it for 10 years. And I had a lot of sources, retired FBI agents. The most interesting thing is that I did learn how to make meth from the state police. And I was able to attend a workshop at the State Police Academy to the different productions of meth and how to identify clandestine meth labs. And if you put me in a room with ingredients, I wouldn't know what to do, but I know how to spot paraphernalia really well. So that's it. And thank you, everyone. I've got to take off for another event, and it's a pleasure to be here with these new exciting voices in YA.
Thank you, Angeline. Bye. What other types of research did folks have to do for their titles?
I guess kind of like Faridah, like I feel like the bulk of my research came from books I'd read. For me, it was really like, again, the dystopian novels I read. And then as for the science research, which I get asked about a lot, I mean, to be honest, I just tried to use whatever I'd retained from my high school chemistry, physics, and environmental science classes, really like the big building blocks of the world. I just wanted like the science to be accessible as possible. And then obviously as things came up in the book, like different specific facts I needed to research, like what's the volume of the entire human population, like those things I looked up, but in general, I definitely under research and then fill in the things as I go.
Yeah, I think my approach is similar to Joan's in that, like, yeah, I don't love doing research, or I think for me as a procrastinator, like research can quickly turn into a way of not writing my pages. So I think I focus a lot on like, yeah, trying to get the story down. But that does cause problems in revision because then it's like, wait, like, could this actually happen? I think one thing that was helpful for me in my book, so the setting is it's a fictional town, like I said, that's, you know, eroding into the sea, that it's based on like several different real life towns in the US where this is a reality. And so because of that, I could just like quickly reference like, what is the situation there? Like how much sand do they lose per year? And have those little reference points so that I didn't have to create something entirely from scratch, but then could also sort of put my own spin on it.
And I think that I drew on a lot of personal experience for What Beauty There Is. So I think that for me, some of the writing was really digging into my own heart to try to give the most honest version that I could of what it would feel like to be Jack or Ava in these circumstances. I also did look at, you know, a lot of research online about what it would be like to have grown up in a family where there was a criminal element. You know, what would it really feel like to have a dad in prison and to have food scarcity and to have things like uncertainty about whether you were going to have a roof over your head. I really felt like that it was important to try to portray that with Jack and Ava's point of views as honestly as I possibly could. But so much of that comes from just trying to feel the characters as well as you can in order to give them a voice that will resonate with readers. So yeah, I think that research is important, and then also just like digging into your own heart and soul about what you think the characters might feel like in those circumstances. That meant a lot to me.
Thank you. We have another question too for everyone, asking if you could talk about how as debut authors, but also sophomore authors managed to have such amazing book covers.
I'm obsessed with everybody's book cover on this panel. And for me, I think just speaking to like the team at Fowl and Friends and just speaking about the type of things I think would really be nice. I'm really bad at like describing images and stuff. And so I was just hoping that it would turn out nicely. And they got Kingsley, not Kingsley, so that's the British cover. They got Adekunle, who is a Nigerian artist, and he illustrated this stunning cover. And yeah, the process was really just nice. Like it was just, they just knew what would look nice. And yeah, I'm really happy with it.
Yeah, I think also I feel very lucky. And for me, I think and I agree, like everyone's book covers this panel are amazing, and I think very uniquely fit each book, which again, I think goes back to like our very amazing teams who like actually understand each other's story, right? And like you look at the covers and you're like, oh, I know what kind of book this is going to be. Yeah, for me, my editor and I talked about like very high level ideas and sort of other covers that we both liked. So like we talked about having the title, like my title's very long, so having the title be a focus on the cover and have it be like moody and emotional. But from there, like the team just took it and then sent me mocks, and I was like, these are all amazing. I'm glad I don't have to choose. Yeah, so I don't know. I feel very fortunate.
Yeah, I also, I love everyone's covers on this panel, especially because I feel like they're all, like Cassandra said, like they all fit the book so well. For me, the initial cover image for The Ones We're Meant to Find was actually nothing like this one. We were kind of considering a more like digital route because I guess it is sci-fi, and we wanted to convey that somehow. But then I was kind of like, oh, could we maybe do an illustrated one? Because I think like the humanity of the story is really at the center of it, and I didn't really want the sci-fi to be like I wanted to come off as like too techy or like scare off readers who might not really like sci-fi as much or find like the tech inaccessible. So yeah, I'm gonna put the cover artist's name in the chat because I think I would butcher if I tried pronouncing it, but he did the amazing cover art, and then the designer was Aurora Pellegrico at Macmillan.
I also feel super lucky to have worked with Macmillan and my editor on a stunning cover. I think that the cover is indicative of what you get with the story. It feels kind of like a maze, and there are little like clues in the cover that I'm so happy with that are metaphors within the story. And I just love that so much. And I just am really grateful to Elizabeth Clark at Macmillan and the designer, Sarah, who I will also put information in the chat about, you know, where you can find them. But I'm so happy with the chance to even be able to feel like that the cover was a metaphor for the story, and that someone who looked at the cover could kind of have a sense of what they were getting into when they opened that cover and started in on the first.
Yeah, it's so important because no matter what we say, we do know that our teens and our youth do judge books by their cover. So that's wonderful. So our last question of the evening, I can't believe it's gone so quickly, this awesome session. The last question is, what children's or YA books inspired you when you were growing up, or what authors do you admire today? And this is for everyone.
For me, growing up, I was obsessed with David Levithan because he was like the first queer author I could find. And so I read everything he wrote. And also obviously John Green when I was younger. And then now it's like Jason Reynolds. I'm obsessed with everything he writes. I love Angie Thomas. Yeah, there's so many authors that are just doing amazing things today. So yeah, those are the authors I like. Also Dean Atta, who wrote The Black Flamingo, really beautiful prose.
Yeah, growing up for me, I was a huge fan of like books like The Warrior Cats and Ramona. And then when I got a little bit older, like I said, I kind of started reading young adult mainly via the dystopia genre. And Marie Lu was a huge influence for me because when I love her books, I loved Legend, and also because she was one of the few, I guess, Asian authors I knew of at the time. And back then I didn't really realize that this could be like a career option. My parents were very like, they didn't really consider being an author as like a viable or stable job. And so I kind of was like, well, Marie could do it, so maybe one day I could too. So it's really been awesome to kind of see like that representation. And yeah, nowadays, some of my favorite authors and people who inspire me are actually people who are also publishing with me. Like I think upcoming author, one of them is June Tan, who is writing Jade Fire Gold, which comes out later this year. She's a huge inspiration. I also love Cory here, who wrote, again, like What Beauty There Is. I absolutely love the writing in that book. And it's really awesome to think that like, yeah, the people who inspire me now are my colleagues.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I don't know, when I was younger, I feel like I just read everything, like from like whatever was in like, you know, the library, like the books you could win, like e-arcs from doing like summer reading challenges. Like I'd read the backs of cereal boxes, just like everything. But yeah, nowadays I agree with Joan. It's like, it's still very surreal, I think, as a debut to be like, oh yeah, we are like somewhat peers with all these people who I love to read. So like, yeah, most recently for me, again, I like sad books, like emotional books, but then yeah, also like characters misbehaving. So like Mary H.K. Choi, Nina LaCour, Courtney Summers, Kelly Lloyd Gilbert. I don't know. I feel like there's way more, I think everyone feels this way, but way more to read, or so much that I want to read it and not enough time to read it.
I feel like I'm going to show my age here by talking about books that I loved when I was young, but I adored Madeleine L'Engle and Philip Pullman, stories that just captured my imagination and took me places that, coming from this small town in Idaho, I knew I would never be able to go to. And they just taught me so much about expanding my horizons and imagining worlds that were, you know, sometimes they felt kind of like out of reach. It allowed me to dream. And I think one book in particular that will always matter to me is Speak by Laurie Halse Anderson. Laurie and the influence that she has had on my writing, I just can't say enough about that. When she was writing things like Speak, nobody talked about it. And it allowed me to feel like that me as a reader, her story reached across infinity and reached across any barrier and connected with my heart. And that taught me the power of stories and the voice that we can have when we write a story, when we tell a story, and when it's honest and true. And books like that are the thing that made me want to be a writer. I also think that it's really cool to be able to read my colleagues' work like Joan and Cassandra, and I'm reading everyone here's novels, and there's just something about that where you're looking at someone who is doing the work at the same time as you, and I feed off of that, and I just grow so much from reading other people's work. I also think it's really great to read outside of my genre. I am reading, you know, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous right now by Ocean Vuong, and I'm reading, you know, I always read Cormac McCarthy and Daniel Woodrell and things that speak to me from other places and genres. And I think that as we pull from the mass that is storytelling, that it allows all of us to be able to write and create stories, you know, in a way that, you know, there's this universe of stories that are being created, and it's such a beautiful thing.
Thank you, Cory. Thank you, everyone. I personally, I knew that I was going to be okay during this pandemic, or fingers crossed it was going to be okay when I could read again, because in the beginning was so stressful and horrible, right? As someone who loves reading. So I just want to thank everyone here for sharing your stories with us, even though they're coming out now. We know, you know, everyone worked really hard for a long time to put those together. And thank you everyone for attending. And now I'm going to hand it back to Mary.
Wow, that was absolutely incredible. And that hour just flew by. Really, thank you all so much. And Candice, really, we could not have done this without you. So thank you to these authors, and thank you to Candice for your moderating tonight. Please, everyone, remember to visit our ALA virtual booth to watch more author programming, find our ARCs, and enter for a chance to win books. You can find our booth at bit.ly/MacKidsALA21. I'll put that into the chat right now. And then, of course, you can always find Elise, Kristen Luby, and myself via email. Just our first names, our last names @macmillan.com. So please keep in touch.
Yes, and don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter. And Mary is going to go ahead and put our contact information in the chat.
Great. Okay, with that, everyone, that is the end of our program. Thank you all for joining us. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. See ya.